Welcome back to the Make It Your Business podcast. Today, James Murray of James Murray Finance and myself, Duncan Casey of Copper Sprocket, are going to be talking about business networking. This is something that I think, often comes up when people start businesses. It's, you just got to get out there, you got to start networking. That's usually what Dave Down the Pub says. Dave Down the Pub, by the way, I think he's going to become a regular fixture in our discussions. But yes, so to kick off, why don't we talk about why networking matters and why it's vital to business?
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, it is one of those things. If you're starting a business, immediately, what can you do to generate income, make a noise about your business, and get it seen and heard? And I think the best thing you can do is go and speak to new people. But that can come with its flaws as well. Mm-hmm. And it's also a case of you can make a lot of noise and end up going to the wrong spaces. So what I think would be good today to talk about is the different types of networking events, maybe what to avoid, and some tactics as well when you're going into them. And also, I think there's also a lot of networking can be misunderstood.
Yeah.
I remember when I first did some networking events, I sort of was very nervous about attending or wanting to go and sort of introduce myself for many different reasons. And I would imagine there's a lot of people out there that just feel a bit icky about the idea of even stepping into a room full of people and talking about their business. Because essentially, a lot of the time, people are in a room just waiting for their time to speak and not really that interested in...
Or you get cornered by, no offense to these type of people, but usually like someone who's... It's Alf, is it Alfie the pub boy from the Fast Show? It's like, 30 years man and boy, that black, oh, what are you doing? Oh, yeah. Video, is it? And you're like, you don't want to be rude because you're like, you're that used to me. You'll be, I'm retiring next Thursday. And it's like, okay, I remember back in the day. And it's like, no, you're helpful. I've had that networking evenings ruined, basically.
Well, this is the thing. We're both quite polite people. And I think in a normal environment, if somebody starts speaking to you, you try and find conversation with them or find common ground. And I think that's one of the things I've been trying to practice with when I do go to networking events, and I'm a lot more selective now on the ones that I go to, so this doesn't happen so much, but sort of not confusing just meeting a random person at a wedding and having a nice conversation with them and actually trying to get something out of the event, while also not being too salesy. Because
was it Denzel Washington, I think, said, well, he's probably quoting someone else, but it's like, don't confuse motion with progress. So it's like, don't, just because you're moving doesn't mean you're progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you first start out, you've got to kiss a few frogs to find out what you like. And I think it's also really important, and we keep coming back to this point of understanding what your business is, who your audience are, what your client avatar is, because that will really help you identify the types of networking events you want to go to. But I think probably one of the first things I'd say is, what comes to your mind when somebody says networking? What's the first thing that springs to your mind when I say business networking?
Business networking, probably some of those hideously awkward, it tends to be, well, I so find around here anyway, around Cambridgeshire, it's sort of like, not expos, but it's like usually a sort of bunch of pop-up sort of stalls, like the biscuit, the mini biscuit and that kind of stuff, and walking around.
It's kind of like an expo, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I have been to sort of quote unquote networking events where it's kind of like you just get a bunch of, you have a glass of wine and you chat in a room, and that's basically it. But it's kind of like, and a bunch of card swapping and never being followed. I think you're right when you say, you've got to, from my experience, I have landed business from networking, but it's the ratio of networking events I've been to land. And I think these are things as well you've got to keep an eye on, is like, how much time am I devoting to this versus what it's giving back to me?
Yeah.
But typically strike rates are like 1 in 30, aren't they? And it's the same in the acting world. It's kind of like, really, realistically, for every 30 people you speak to, you can expect to land some sort of business, probably. But networking is... I think it depends on what you go in. If you go into it going, I have to make a sale today, that's not networking, that's sales.
Yeah.
Networking is much like marketing. It's kind of like being out there, just spreading awareness, really. You need to see yourself as a walking billboard for your business. And in networking, I guess, yes, you're going to be in a room with a bunch of other business owners, but then networking is, it's not all the same. I've been to networking events where it's predominantly landlords or, people in sectors that have got no interest in marketing or wouldn't need my services. So it's, and also, what budget are they at?
Yeah, that's always a bit disappointing when you go to a sort of a new networking event and you go in and you realise there's not really anyone here that you can, that there's no synergies. I mean, because sometimes there's different levels of networking. You might not be necessarily looking to work with your direct clientele, but maybe people that can introduce you to your clientele. I was always a bit pessimistic about it because I thought, well, anybody that's going networking isn't busy in their own business, and the people I want to work with are actually going to be busy in their business, so they're not going to have time to go networking. And to be fair, that is the case in some cases. You do find that there are just businesses in there that are selling sort of low-end products, and you're not necessarily going to be getting decision makers at the type of businesses you want to work with. So it is quite a tricky one. And as I said, you've got to look at a few, try a few, and get to the right point that you find one that you like and stick with those. I've been to a couple where they've been more like clubs, and I think they've had the sole focus hasn't just been networking. It's been maybe an educational piece. It's also maybe been building relationships with other business owners, a bit like we do here, but where we're communicating and sharing our aches and pains of business growth, or just trying to navigate some sort of challenge that we're having. And because you sort of see those people every couple of weeks, I went to one that used to be sort of an evening fortnightly occasion, which I think you went to, the one in Peterborough.
Yep.
A couple of times. What they'd do is they'd have it every fortnight, and you would on one of the fortnights of that month, it was just the members only. So you paid a subscription. It wasn't too expensive, but that you created quite a nice close-knit group of people that you're not going to necessarily work with everybody in the room, but you will find your gang, and then you'd collaborate, you'd talk about things. There maybe would be a guest speaker come on, and it would be very much a collaboration meeting and just get to kind of grease the wheels of those relationships. But also because it was the evening, I think that maybe drew people out that might be busy in the day. So that was quite good. And then what they would do on the other fortnight of the month, they would open it up to outside guests, and that would be more of a speed networking event. So there'd be a bit where you got to introduce people. They might still also have a speaker on where you'd learn something. So I felt you were getting more out of it. So even if you weren't necessarily speaking with clients, you were maybe also going away with some new knowledge, or learning about some business hacks or something like that.
Yeah. In fact, I remember that one of them I went to, they did one on LinkedIn, which was quite good. But yeah, I know. I mean, I suppose it's like anything. And you see this in many industries with people who, if there was one answer to everything, we'd all be doing it, wouldn't we? Yeah. These are all, and much like I try and educate people on marketing, it's like you can't quantify these things in a sort of direct ROI. Like, what am I getting? Because we've spreadsheeted ourselves to death in the West. Yeah. Everything has to be quantifiable and known before you go in, and it just isn't possible. And I think there are certain things in a business that you have to see as part of the visibility, the kind of contextualizing it, getting it out there in front of people, and networking is one of them. There are. Yeah, I mean, I've struggled with networking because it's been obviously you could fritter away all your money on joining networks and joining this and joining that, and I have done. I've joined some pretty high profile ones in the past that have cost a bomb, and I haven't really. Some of them, oftentimes, and I think we've touched on this before, but it's kind of like the educational side that you'll get will be a ton of stuff about like how to motivate your team, or how to do X, Y, or Z from a very high level, from a sort of macro level business, which I know is very valuable. But to me, I'm trying to get to that level, and none of this is helping me, and it's kind of, but by the same token, I think if you've just started out and you're just looking for things to move the dial, to move the needle or whatever, then networking is.
I think if you're starting out as well, I think one of the things you want to look at is how you're coming across, and also trying to build genuine connections wherever it is you're going. So that's going into it being open-minded. But what would you say makes somebody memorable at networking? What would you recommend? And I think you'll have a good perspective of this, of being a trained actor. I think those skills can come into play when you go into these types of settings.
I think from a just, I try and draw the distinction, because other people will say, oh, you're an actor, so you must be good at, public speaking, or, like I guess I can do that, but one doesn't necessarily follow the other. I think, but understanding your hook, it's striking that line, isn't it, between not coming off as some sort of automaton who walks in and goes, because I've done it where you sit around the table, right, and everyone gets up and introduces themselves, and it's like, I'm Kay Brimbley from KB Homes. We are the blah, blah, blah. And they give you the strap line and you're like, well, hello, we're human beings. Don't talk to me like I'm it's not a sales call. Yeah. Like, come on. And I've had that where, I've had salespeople do it and they're like, we are the, and you're like, you don't believe any of this, do you? No. None of it's just authenticity. I think really it boils down to, finding an authentic way to talk about you and your business. That's gonna, like you said, you've got to kiss frogs. You're going to meet a bunch of people for whom there isn't an alignment, whether that's a personality or business, and you'll probably feel that quite quickly.
Well, I had one guy ask me what I did, and I told him, and he looked at his watch, said, "That's interesting," and I never spoke to him again. It was a beautiful moment.
I've had that before. I'm like trying to look at my watch. I'm like, can't, it's bad. And the trouble is, I find like I end up talking to people who like are in construction or something, and I'm like, this is wasting my time. You don't need to market that. Not really. I mean, I bet you could, but then you're not getting away.
Whereas that would be really ideal for you, for somebody like me. Yeah. I'd be really interested, and also it would be more natural because I'd naturally have questions to ask that are actually interesting questions that I want to know. And I think if it's trying to answer my own question here, but I think it's trying to find some common ground. So I think if you've identified potentially that there's somebody there, there's probably an analogy or phrase out there about, two ears, one mouth. But if you actually actively listen, ask interesting questions and actively listen, that's a really good starting point, without any agenda as well, maybe, to start with.
No, I agree. I think, you do have to go into these things without the agenda, without the pressure of that. It needs to be, at the end of the day, you're there to have one-to-one conversations with people. Yeah. And I've had some really great conversations with people at networking events. Doesn't necessarily lead to business. In fact, most of the time it does. But then, it's about, I think as well, for me, it's probably quite easy. And it's not something I think about an awful lot, but it's kind of like having what makes you stand out. Well, I guess because I'm in movies and stuff, people can look it up. That's memorable. It's not always, the problem with that though is it can then lead you down sort of rabbit holes where people just want to talk about movies, and it's kind of like,
I think that's probably what and we actually met at a networking event the first time, and I think actually that's a real life example of I was really interested in that side. So it's a really good hook, but also where do you draw the line between being friendly and transactional? Obviously you don't want to, you're both there for a reason, and you want to find that common ground, but you could go off on a tangent talking about something that's not necessarily relevant.
But then, like, I suppose, to use us as an example, that's meant that we've then been able to do stuff like this, and and it's like, all right, the value isn't necessarily that we buy from each other yet. I mean, I don't know if I need to finance anything, you'll be my first port of call, that, but it's it's being open to what can come from it, and
Yeah, but I struggle because what I'll do is at that time I've met Duncan and I'm really interested and we're making a friendship over here. I'm very conscious when I then leave a networking event, how many other people did I not speak to? But I think what you've got to do when you go into it, and I hadn't actually thought about this, but this is really something that I think people need to be aware of. You're not going to get a chance to speak to everybody. And I think if you try and, unless it is an event that's particularly set up to do some sort of like speed speed dating style scenario, which
they do.
Which can be quite painful sometimes, and I don't really know the value in doing that. But that aside, I think you have to accept that you're not going to be able to speak to every person in that room. I think you try and find a few people, make some good connections. It is about it's quality over quantity, really.
Yeah, and then like you say that you again, you can't quantify all these things, mathematically. There isn't a solution to networking.
No,
like there isn't an equation or an algorithm that can tell you what to do. You just have to go in and be open to it, and that's hard for some people, I think, because they go, well, what am I going to get out of it? Potentially nothing.
But potentially it's going to be like community service with a coffee.
Yeah. But then you have to see the value in that as well, because you will learn what not to do, and that has value as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what I have done is I have built up my sort of resilience with going. I think when I first started going, I remember visually waiting at a door once and being one of the last people to go. And I looked through the pane in the window and could see everybody chatting away with their coffees. And I actually really dislike eating at networking events, because like the idea of eating a pastry while you're sort of crumbling there and somebody shakes your hand, where they've got, it's sort of, I'm just like, let's just stick to hot and cold drinks. But I remember looking through and I had this moment of dread, and it washed over me, and I was tempted to just leave. And I just pushed myself, took a breath, and just went through. And it is probably, I felt a bit like acting at the time. I was just sort of put a bit of a mask on and just positive energy. But one thing that's not happened in a long time. So I think by going and just practicing and doing it more, I've got better in it. And I've also become more natural, where I don't feel that I'm acting as much. I can be myself, go in there with genuine interest in finding out about the people in the room. But yeah, definitely in those first few cases, it's quite normal to feel a bit nervous about going in and doing this sort of thing, because it isn't easy, and a lot of people have never done it. It's not the most simple thing to go into a room of 30 brand new people you've never met and introduce yourself.
No, I guess
tell them what you do.
It's never bothered me that much, really, because I'm quite comfortable just standing there on my own and waiting to talk. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think when I went when I met you at that networking thing, that was through my accountant Polly, who I'd like to get on the show.
Of course, yeah.
But I said to her, like, can I come along to it? She's like, well, you come to this and that, and I was like, all right, fine. So I went along, and I don't think she'd arrived yet, so I was just sort of standing there. I didn't know anyone, but someone came in and said, hi, and was like, oh, how are you doing? What you got? So I think something I've noticed that you're very good at, it's on my to-do list, if you like, is getting branded clothing.
Yes.
Because it makes such a difference. You don't realise when you're just standing around and you look like Jeff from accounts.
Yeah, and even if you've got a little name badge, everybody keeps like looking. Yeah. And if it's really bad, if it's been handwritten, they're like, what's your Duncan? David?
What do you do? And I think, it's kind of again, you're a walking billboard. You have to make sure that you.
Yeah. So I've got for people, I'm not wearing any of it now, but I've got my logo, and my business is James Murray Finance, so it's quite nice in the fact of it's my name, and that's written all over the back of my shirts and my my top. So even in the winter as well, I normally put that on over a hoodie, if depending on the type of event, dress for the occasion. Mm-hmm. But and then on the front, I've got it as well. So I went to actually an event yesterday, and they gave me a name badge. So I had James Murray here, and I had James Murray here, and they can't miss me. And it also released. Even if also for people you've met before, because as you know, we're all really terrible at remembering names if we've met somebody once about 3 months ago or a year ago. And it's a really good skill if you can remember those people's names. But you might as well make it easy for that person to remember who you are. And it just it just breaks down one of those barriers, and it just helps with the communication, helps things go along, and also probably makes you more memorable as well.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, and it comes down to branding and marketing, I suppose. But it's that, and ultimately, I think it comes down to just practice. You just have to go and accept that it's going to be a bit of a, dumpster fire the first few sites.
It might be. I think if you're going as a business owner, I think it's really important to practice your sort of 30-second pitch.
Yeah.
And by pitch, I mean sort of, it sounds really obvious, but actually, anybody watching or listening, go and do this. Practice telling a random stranger what it is your business does in 30 seconds. It's because really that's about the attention span you're going to get from somebody, depending on how intricate the business is as well. So if you can really neaten that up, I mean, if you ask me what my business does, I could tell you over the course of a lunch a day and go into all the nuances of all the different offerings. And that's something that at first I really wanted to do. Whenever I met somebody, I want to tell you everything. I do this and I do that and I do this. Yeah. And what I've done over time is I've really tried to précis that. I've really tried to reduce that down into some clear bullet points. And I think that really helps people then understand what you do.
Yeah. I was actually, I had a client yesterday who kind of called me up in a flap over there. We don't do their website, but they we do all the marketing and email sequences and stuff like that. And they were panicking because certain things aren't working, but the site needed, the copy and the site really needed going over. And I'm going to name names, but like their H1 on their homepage, the main, what should be the thing that gets you in, was totally wrong. I mean, it didn't even speak about their it just said business solutions tailored to your needs or whatever. And it's like, that's not what you do though. It's like, I don't know why people, and then, the people, I think certainly something I've noticed recently looking at websites and going around is that there's a lot of this trying to be all things to all men type, for all clients of all sizes. I looked at an HR firm somewhere recently because someone had put me on to draw inspiration from, and it was like, we can cater no matter your size, right? And I'm like, I don't think you could service Tesla as well as you could like the mom and pop video store around the corner. It's like rubbish. That's total rubbish, and we know it. And if I go on there, that doesn't build confidence in me because you're trying to tell me that you could service anyone, and that's total rubbish. So it's about distilling, all these things is like get it down to one sentence.
With the problem is we don't want to miss out on an opportunity.
No,
and I think what you do is you try and encompass as many people as you can rather than niching down on more specific stuff. And I think that's the problem. We try and cast this huge net.
Yeah.
Business consulting, business solutions. I mean, that could be any spectrum of things.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if you do finance, I do business finance. Okay, well, what sort of business finance do you do? So you could say, if you're in a room, if we're working on the networking example here, and I'm going to speak at the Chamber of Commerce to construction group of people, I might be sort of targeting and thinking, well, actually, I know there's a real difficulty in invoice finance. Well, that's a product that I offer. I'm today going to go in with my invoice finance hat on. Yeah, I'd love to offer them all of my suite of products. I'd love to offer them business loans or asset finance might be one, but actually if I went in with maybe a more niche product, that might spark more conversations and actually in the long run benefit me more with regards to the type of inquiries that I might receive. So it is just trying to identify that and go in and understand who the audience or the audience, who the connections are going to be in that room when you're networking.
Yeah.
It's I think one of the things I really like, as I said at the start there, is I really like kind of been to a couple of lunch and learns. And I feel that takes the pressure off. So anybody that's a bit nervous about doing any networking, you know that you should be doing it, but you really are worried about going out there and actually doing networking. Okay, take a step back and try and identify a lunch and learn or something where it's not necessarily a networking event. You may network with people as a byproduct of being there, but the primary objective is to go and learn something. So there's some that held in Stamford. They're really good, actually. It's quite a small event held at a pub. They do some lunch. I know I said about the eating, but to be honest, they do separate that part. So you're seated.
Yes.
So you're not doing all the...
Not awkward.
So and they do a couple of presentations. It's normally a marketing type thing. Yeah. And they've got a couple of speakers and you go and it just takes that pressure off the actual networking piece. You will do it. And actually on this one, they do like an elevator pitch. So you do get the opportunity to stand up, say what your business does. So it's quite nice in that regard.
Yeah.
But they're quite good events. So anybody that's thinking about doing it, it's going to be a good thing, but you're a bit nervous. Try and find an event that maybe is a lunch and learn. I think that is a really good thing to try and do.
Yeah, no, that's solid. I think, something that, put it this way, something I've learned recently and something that I've injected into my, not only networking, but it falls under networking, but kind of whenever I'm interacting really with anyone who is potentially going to help me with business, is giving them very clear, what I want to achieve in what time frame. So with networking, that might be, in our case, we are content creators, obviously we're video producers and everything, but for people's business, it's like, look, we want to achieve very high-end, high production value, like really good cinematic looking stuff. And I want to be, we want to be nailing a client like that, usually one a month, like bringing on board another one a month, and producing content for them. And you put some sort of goal out there that you say, like, by December, my goal is X. Now that might, may or may not have any kind of resonance with the person you're talking to, but I think as long as you're setting those things out, it gives people a clear instruction to go out there and help you achieve it. That's the...
You've just reminded me of somebody. I was at a Chamber of Commerce event. I sound like a complete networking whore here. I've tried a few. I was at this networking event and this guy walked in and he professed in the early stages, I've never been to a networking event before. He was a hairdresser.
Okay.
And we're all in this and the chamber events, so, they're fairly professional, but it was at a pub setting. And he walks in and the first thing he asks is for 100K. He says, do you know anybody in this room that has got 100K to invest? I'm thinking of starting a property portfolio.
Right.
So that's not the way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like...
Genuinely, he came in and I said, have you ever done any networking events before? And he goes, no, I've never done it. I don't really like this sort of scene, to be honest, but my old man said I should come in and speak to people and see if there's any investors.
Dad told me to.
Yeah. And he got this, it was almost like this was a novel idea to go and actually create like a property portfolio using other people's money and then paying them back a percentage or that sort of thing. And I was like, that's a pretty hard sell anyway, but going into a room full of strangers and asking for money, I thought that is the antithesis of the way to network.
I see this all the time in the film industry as well. I see people who come into it and don't really have a clue. And the trouble is, again, it's very easy to create movement without progress in the film industry. And I think it's true of other industries as well, that someone like that could go around networking, and probably have conversations with people who are just trying to be polite and will just waste time not getting anywhere, because it's kind of like, well, that's... again, it comes back to where, I said about seek counsel, not opinions. Your dad, Dave down the pub, like, these are not people you want to be asked, I've got a really good business idea, what if, you leverage other people's money to buy property? Well, that has been done 1,000 times. You can throw a rock and speak to the nearest property investor. Start to get advice.
I think this guy had good intentions, and I'm not trying to be critical. I am being critical of him, but I'm not sort of slating him in the fact of, I think he was a hairdresser, and I think he'd had clients that he'd known for years, and I think he'd had a positive experience where somebody that trusted him and dealt with him for years, he'd sort of that had been the seed of this sort of business idea, but he then thought he could just then transport that into a cold networking setting. And it was like, so I mean, me and this other gentleman I was speaking to at the time, we sort of said to him, okay, well, that's fine, but what you need to do is sort of, if you want to build a good network of people, is you need to actually join a group, get to know them over months, build that trust, build that credibility, and then maybe you will get to that position again where people would trust you with that investment. But it's very, very unlikely that you're going to find somebody on the same with a cold calling. You've got to hit a lot of numbers. You might get lucky, maybe, but I think that would be too good to be true if you did, especially with that type of investment.
I think, yeah. And, it speaks to another thing really, but it's like it's hard because obviously you can't arrive fully formed in anything. But I think when you're going to a networking event, again, the thing you need to prep is, what are you going to talk about? How are you going to control the agenda from your side of things? What can you talk about that you've done? Give people the headline figures. And like I say, with that example of my client yesterday, I was like, you just need when you come to someone's website, the first thing it should be is, what do you do? How much is it? And can you prove it, really? And so it's social proof. It's some sort of cost. And I've said to him, I was like, right, you need to be starting from $75, and he's in America, a month. And then also think down the line. I mean, because I know this is more applicable to marketing and websites and stuff, but it's like, remove barriers. So many people as well, like they'll get me to do any marketing. Well, where am I sending people? We'll give them the contact us page. Well, you're just putting touch points in front of people. It's like, so someone has to click on that, go to your Calendly or whatever, book an appointment, which, I'm not available for 2 weeks. So, okay, then they have to sit around for a fortnight or however long it is to talk to you. Then they've got to have a sort of awkward 15-minute or half an hour consultation. And it's like, you're just putting barriers in, and then you've got to do a proposal, and then they have to agree to it. That is, yes, I get that that's often how people have to operate to begin with. But if you can find a way, like I said to my client yesterday, it's like they need to click on that button and it takes them straight to the sign-up form, and then they put their card details in and away they go. That's got to be how that works.
You need to remove those barriers of entry.
And it's the same thing with, when you're networking. If someone does say, no, I'd be quite interested in that, it's like, great, when can I give you a call? I'll call you tomorrow. We'll talk about it, or I'll come see you. Or, it needs to be like, you need to be prepared.
Yeah, nothing says value in connections like a LinkedIn follow-up message that looks like it's been copied and pasted more times than a GCSE exam.
yeah. Well, yeah, and with AI and everything, I've done LinkedIn cold outreach. I did it for a year, and I've handled it for other clients, and it's very. The trouble is, it's now the market's just getting saturated. You probably get it as well, but people, hi, let's connect, and really happy to connect, and I'm not here to sell you anything. And it's like, well, it's LinkedIn.
Yeah,
you are, but let's,
100%. I think if just touching on LinkedIn briefly, because it is a form of networking, I think LinkedIn is a brilliant tool you can use, but I think if you just use it generically, you're going to get low-end results. I think where LinkedIn can work in synergy with networking is when is for following up, but in an authentic way. So again, earlier I said about quality over quantity, is identifying the right people and then spending the time with them. And yes, following them up, using LinkedIn as a way to connect with them and just having another touch point, because let's say you've met somebody for that first time at an event, then that's the second touch point to connect with them on LinkedIn. Maybe wait a day before you then send them a message, because again, you're creating, is time bridging, or is that a dating thing? I remember somebody using that term once. Look it up, time bridging. I think it might be related to the dating world, but essentially what I think time bridging is, time bridging, actually, we're going to go off on one here. I think it's where you go on a date with somebody and you take them on multiple places within the same evening. So it's probably one of those like playbook things where psychologically you get further down the line in a relationship quicker. So for example, you might go on a date, instead of just going out for dinner, first of all you go for a walk, then you go to the cinema, then you go for a meal, and then later on you go to a club. So you've got to these different areas, and then it feels like you've had more dates within the one evening.
Okay, this is talking about meditation and physics.
I probably made it up. Time bridging. There we go. Can I?
Strategies and methods used to maintain connection and closeness with the partner, especially when separated by distance or time constraints.
Okay. I feel we're on the same path. Yes. But the point I'm making is by having these different. Every time you make a new connection, if I go to a networking event and then I'm there with you, I connect with you, and then send you a follow-up message within the same hour, that's going to get lost. Whereas if we meet on Tuesday evening, I sound like a Craig David song now, and then on the Wednesday afternoon, I would send a connection request, and then on the Friday, send a message, it's great to see you earlier in the week. Can we follow up our conversation we had? Also, here's I've got your email, I'll ping you an email with some more details of my offering. And then you send the email with a link to your website. You've added like 4 different stages there, which have then again built up that trust, and that person will feel that they've got more of a connection with you. So then when you then arrange that follow-up meeting, you're just going to be in a much warmer place to potentially do business or have a new referral network or whatever it is you're going to do. So I think it's really important you can't do that with 30 people. So I think going back to one of the things I said earlier, when you're in that room, let's say it is a large networking event, is trying to maybe identify, not be too clinical, but if you are speaking with somebody that isn't going to be able to offer you a huge amount of value, don't feel too bad about moving on and just try and find somebody else within the room that you are going to have maybe a more stronger connection with.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
One of the other things I would like to mention as well is, again, if you aren't a massive fan of networking or you really want to elevate networking, is to become a presenter within a networking event. So it puts you in a position of authority and credibility to the room. So if you can actually get to the point where you get invited or you put yourself forward to discuss a product, a service, something that you are well versed in, obviously something that you can talk eloquently about and you have experience in, then as the presenter in that room, it does actually take a lot of pressure off you, because people will come to speak to you, and hopefully you will also then attract the people that want to that find your services interesting. And that's a really good way to potentially pick up leads and try and build that network, and also sort of sieve through the people that you wouldn't necessarily want to speak to.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that takes a lot of finesse, I think. Certainly from my perspective, I've been asked in the past to think about doing a presentation at networking stuff, and my thing has always been, well, but I suppose what I would need to do is probably refine it down to talking about something on camera, working on camera.
I think what you would be brilliant at doing is we talked about niching down.
Ooh.
Obviously, you have a lot of offerings. I would go for pick one particular skill. Let's say, for example, people do struggle with talking on camera. I would home in, let's say, on that. I would create a 30-minute pitch that is absolutely brilliant, that is purely on that. And then I would offer that out, because I think it's something that offers a lot of value, but it's also got a synergy with what you do. And it just puts you in a position of expertise.
Yeah.
I have spoken at some events before, and they're talking about picking the wrong event, and there's nothing worse than speaking at the wrong event. And at the end, I remember it was actually about invoice finance here, and I remember it was actually a room full of business people, but at the end it looked like based on their reaction, I discussed astrophysics in Welsh. I mean, they just had blank looks all over their face, and I was like, okay, I've probably done the wrong speech here to the wrong group, or the right speech to the wrong group. And I think it's obviously it's important that you don't go doing how to speak on camera to a room full of actors.
Or a bunch of people who've no interest in being the face of their business, because that's the other side of it as well. Or I think because we've seen it as well. And we go to a lot of the local networking events, and there are people of all age ranges, and many of them probably they know about this social media malarkey. They know they've got to do content, right? But they don't know how, they don't know where to start, and it's kind of like, you could lead them down a garden path that's simply not going to work for them. And that's the other thing as well, is thinking about where whatever service or good that you offer, what does it do for people? Because you have to speak to people about, what your service will offer them. And it's true, that's true across like media, but it's also true in networking settings. It's like you need to really think about, and like it comes back to what you said as well about listening, listen, and then from your perspective offer a solution or offer something and say, look, this is what I would do. That can often be a good way to structure conversations with people because at some point when you're talking to someone, they will go, do you know what, I've been thinking about that for a long time, but I just don't know how to go about doing it or starting it, or, and everything will come down to price. I'm sorry, but like, unless you're in a room full of billionaires who've never thought of your service before, it will come down to what's it going to cost.
Yeah, but you don't want to get into price too early, do you?
You don't, but you do need to have that in the back of your head, because I have it as well. Like, and people will say to me, like, what would it cost to do a video? And it's like, well, how long is it?
You know what a good reply to that is?
What?
Is ask them what they think it would cost.
Yeah.
And you'll get there quite early and work out.
Completely different. I've had it before where people have thought it's going to cost 20 grand when actually it's probably about 5.
Yeah, but that's great. You're working from a good position.
And vice versa. It's been people thought it would cost, if it takes 10 seconds to watch it, it takes 10 seconds.
The problem is British people, we don't want to be ripped off. We want to get a good deal. And I think sometimes it's a natural question to ask how much it's going to cost, but it's not really what they're necessarily thinking. So it's one of those things you almost have to get out of the way. I think by asking the question back to them, you'll actually you'll get what they think the answer is meant to be, and it just breaks down that barrier, and then you can work from that point.
It's true. Well, there you go. I think we probably have to wrap it up.
I think we've covered networking. I think a leaving statement there. If you're worried about networking but it's what you want to do, you've got a business, I strongly recommend get out there, shout about your business. If you're worried about going into a room and talking about your business, practice your elevator pitch, know what your business does, be able to talk about it within 30 seconds, be yourself, be friendly, go and try and listen and learn about other businesses. The worst case scenario is that you might learn something when you go. So go network, set yourself a plan in the next 30 days to go to a networking event. I strongly recommend it. What's the worst that can happen?
There you go. You heard it here first. Thank you. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, please do like, comment, and subscribe, and all the usual calls to action that we like to put out there. We do release shorts as well, so you can get sound bites and tidbits that way if you don't want to listen to the full show. Although, if you're listening to this, you already have. Thank you so much for sticking around. We are, it's been really great. Actually, the response to the show has been really good. So we want to try and keep that momentum up. And if there's anyone that you think could benefit from this, or if you yourself are a business owner and you're thinking about maybe you'd like to be a guest on the show, please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Leave us a comment or reach out. We do have an email address that I can't remember at the moment, so I'll put it on the screen. You can check our email address here. Okay. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you again next time.
Thank you.